All right, guys. Hi, and welcome back to the High Man podcast. Today is episode 31. It is the 31st of March, 6:08 in the evening. Thanks for joining us again. We're nearly into April, hopefully getting into the warmer months. But yeah, how are you doing today, Pete? All right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. Pretty good. Just started the Easter break for uni, so I've got 3 weeks off. Well, 3 weeks off lectures and seminars, so excited to just relax a little bit. What about yourself? You got any Easter break? Or?
Yeah, I've got, I think, a 4-week Easter break, but I'll have to be doing quite a lot of work for my project. So
yeah, same.
Won't be too much of a break, but yeah.
Well, at least you don't have to go into uni that much, well, as much. But yeah, so today's theme for the podcast is going to be kind of based on different ideas of self-improvement. People are in the stratosphere of social media and are very prominent figures based off what their ideas are of self-improvement. So we're going to kind of discuss like maybe 4 people, maybe 5, and their like kind of ways of improving one's own life, and discuss the themes that correlate between each of them and kind of like the differences. But do you want to take us off, Pete, and get started?
Yeah, sure. So the first person I thought we'd talk about is Jordan Peterson. He's obviously extremely popular on social media and seems to be continuing to grow, and has obviously been very successful because of that. And a big reason for his success is he has a message which resonates with people in terms of, you know, how they should conduct themselves in their lives. And yeah, so it's kind of just very focused on improvement and growth over time. So getting into the details of it, I think a big part of his philosophy is kind of to do, in terms of self-improvement, is to do with his future authoring program. So in his future authoring program, you basically have to come up with a vision for the type of life you want, to create an ideal for what you want, and then also kind of set out a life that you want to avoid, so you have motivation from both sides, and then you set goals based on that and come up with a strategy to achieve those goals. So one of the things I really like about this method is that it's quite malleable to the individual. So obviously different people are going to value different things. They're going to have different personal challenges to overcome and different things which are important to them. So this allows them to kind of visualize for themselves the kind of life they want and make goals based on that, rather than it being a projection from someone else about the type of life you should live. It's you actually thinking what type of life you want to live, and then coming up with specific goals based on that. So have you got any thoughts on that so far, K-Lock?
Yeah, it's nice. Like when I was looking into Peterson, he the thing that he kind of like always asks people is like why would you want to bet yourself? And the answer to that, like you said, is so different between different people that it's going to motivate people in different ways. And I do think it's important that people realise what their motivation is in life. Like everyone, I don't know if everyone has like a higher purpose in life. I kind of do believe in it, but I think it's kind of hard for me to believe in that when I don't really understand and realise what my own higher purpose is in life. So I kind of don't know if I believe in it. That's probably just because of a bias I have, because I don't have it myself yet. But if I do believe in it, which I think I should, everyone does have that purpose and it's unique to them, and they need to figure it out in order to live like a kind of meaningful life. And like you're saying, like this is just like a perfect way for a person to figure that out, is using the self-authoring program. What are the push and pull factors that's going to motivate them to strive for greatness, and they can define the greatness themselves.
Yeah, and I think another important point about it is that it leaves space for things to change over time. So obviously right now you might be thinking you might not be happy where you are in your life, and you don't know exactly the direction you want to go in. You don't know exactly what the perfect life for you will be. So what you do is you make your best attempt at formulating a vision for that, and then over time, as you start to make progress, you're going to start to realize, oh, this thing I thought I wanted, maybe I actually want something slightly different. And over time, you can change your goals and you can change your aim. But what's important is that you're getting that positive momentum and you're actually learning and improving. And I think a theme throughout this episode is going to be about how you can set goals to do something, but a big part of it isn't just about the goals. It's about the type of person you're able to become in the pursuit of the goals. So that's where this personal development comes from. You might have these goals which are somewhat external, but in setting that goal, in order to achieve it, you need to become the type of person with the type of traits that is capable of doing so, which is almost more important and carries over to the rest of life, more than just the individual benefits of the goal you achieve does.
Yeah, it's kind of trying to actualize the identity that you want to have and be, and it kind of gives the motivation more of a higher purpose. Although one thing that I like about Jordan Peterson, when he talks about self-improvement, he says that you should scale down the improvements you want to see in your life into something small enough that is achievable. And I think that can kind of seem like a little bit, to a lot of people that seems insignificant, but like you were saying, it's kind of about those incremental steps that each person should take, and then eventually that accumulates into this identity and representation of who they want to be. Do you have any thought on I don't know if it's a danger or how else I could call it, do you have any thought on any risks in the way that Jordan Peterson kind of describes these self-improvement tactics, scaling down something to the smallest achievable thing? Even a lot of people take the piss out of Jordan Peterson's idea of just cleaning your room. They think it's kind of insignificant because the reward you get from it is very insignificant compared to the great achievements in life that you can achieve.
Yeah. I am a big believer in the effects of small incremental progress, because it makes sense to me, even from just a mathematical perspective. If you improve 1% every time, that 1% is bigger each time because of compound interest. So starting that incremental progress is very important. And people might think they're above that incremental progress, even if it requires them to do something very small and seemingly insignificant in terms of an individual task. However, and this is the importance of comparing it to comparing your ideal vision to a vision of the future you want to avoid, because you can start to realize, I might think I'm above taking these little steps, but if it's all I'm capable of doing, then it's the right thing to do, because otherwise I'm going to end up in this future that I don't want. So having that motivation, you might not think it's ideal that you have to do this small task that you don't think that you might think you're above, but compared to what will happen if you decide not to, then yeah, that's definitely a motivating factor. But on the other side of things, I do kind of understand an argument against such small progress, because obviously if it's all you can manage, it's better than nothing. But I think sometimes there is something to be said about taking a deep dive into things and fully committing to something. Whereas if you just try to make very small changes, then you might not really see any benefit. So you don't really gain the same amount of momentum. Whereas when you make a massive change in your life, it can actually be easier to do. For example, I've gone through phases where I do a dopamine detox type thing, where I just completely get off of stop watching YouTube, and basically all I'm allowed to do in my free time is read. So not getting any extra stimulation. And arguably that's actually an easier thing to do than just trying to moderate your use of technology, because when you're just trying to moderate it, there's always that mental battle going on. Whereas when you just fully commit and say, yeah, I'm just going to delete the apps that I spend too much time on, for example, even though that's a big change, as opposed to it being, like if you're spending half an hour a day on Instagram, rather than making a goal to only spend 20 minutes a day next week and then 10 minutes the week after, I feel like to some degree it might just be easier just to delete the app. And although it's a bigger, more extreme shift, you know, I would say it's kind of easier because there's less of a temptation to fall back into your old ways, but perhaps that's slightly short-term thinking. What do you think about whether there's situations where it's good to dive in rather than taking small incremental steps?
I don't know. I think it's obviously very dependent on the situation and like the type of habit or the type of like thing you're trying to improve. I do think there is some like a difference would be in my mind when you have these small incremental steps that you take. I feel like they're easier to gain momentum over the long term. It's very easy for like a lot of people to throw themselves into like the gym, for example, and join the gym, get a membership, go 4 times the first week or two, and really like build themselves up and throw a lot of effort into it. And then it kind of isn't sustained over a long period of time. Whereas if the person kind of got the gym membership, started going every Monday, and then maybe like after 2-3 weeks started going every Monday or Wednesday and like built that up over time, I feel like the momentum would be carried over through a long period of time. But then, like you said, certain individuals want to see progress straight away, and that is possibly like the motivation for them. So they need to see results almost straight away. But I think it's just dependent on the person and like what you're trying to, what the thing you're trying to do is.
Yeah. To be fair, I would kind of agree with you that that for most situations, it's the small incremental progress is more powerful. And what you said there about people wanting to see progress really quickly, well, I think that's probably an issue that stops people from really making progress in the long run. And like I gave the example there of how I've done the dopamine detox, but like I'm using my phone too much at the moment, so perhaps that was just too much of a short-term thing for me. But I do think in terms of like sometimes a big change, if you can manage it, then taking a big dive into something can give you that kickstart that you need to kind of shift your life. So there's benefits to both things. And another important part of this goal setting kind of philosophy that Jordan Peterson talks about is kind of how the positive emotion you feel in your life, a lot of that's going to come from the pursuit of goals rather than achieving them. So it's more important for a fulfilled and satisfying life to be in the pursuit of goals and to have things that you're working towards and to know you're making progress as opposed to achieving the goal itself. And, you know, we're going to talk about James Clear later, but this is kind of an idea that he talks about as well, how it's about the system, not the goal, not the outcome. So yeah, you get an important part of it is you get that dopamine hit from the pursuit, and that kind of builds over time. So when you make a little bit of progress, it positively reinforces the behaviors that led to that, and that builds over time. So that's partly the reason for kind of that positive feedback loop, which leads to exponential progress.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. One thing that I thought was interesting that I saw Peterson talk about was obviously when you set yourself up to improve your life, you need to kind of have this aim and this kind of like endpoint, not endpoint, but like this goal that you want to kind of achieve in as an overall goal, or maybe like more niche and individual goals. But he said like when you have an aim, the world reconfigures itself around that aim. Like your perception of the world reconfigures itself around that aim. And like the example he gave, which is kind of little bit abstract, but it makes a lot of sense. Have you heard of that selective attention test? You probably remember it from reading the book.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away the easy answer to it, but if people want to watch on YouTube, Google the selective attention test, and there's it's a really interesting video, and that kind of represents how what you are looking at and what you're aiming at does genuinely change the world, and it manifests itself in different ways. And he says, if you're kind of just thinking to yourself, "Oh, I'm a bit of a loser, and I'm not really doing much and this and that," and you have this negative self-talk, for example, the world is going to seem more negative. Whereas when you set yourself up and have these goals that you've written down and you're on the path to self-improvement, the world is going to seem a lot more happier and easier to get it through, I think. And that was interesting. But he also said there's a risk of, you need to be careful with what you aim at, because the world can manifest itself in negative ways around what you aim at. So you need to always kind of be attentive to reconfiguring what the end point is for yourself and stuff.
Yeah. How do you mean the world? So how the world can negatively manifest itself around a goal? If seemingly this goal is something you want and it's positive, how can the world project negativity onto that?
I don't remember the exact example he gave, but one that kind of comes to mind with me would be, let's say I want to go to the gym and just get absolutely wham and get huge and become this kind of dominant alpha male who is a bit of a sigma and doesn't want to fucking do anything but be the top dollar of the dominance hierarchy. That is kind of a good goal, because it's going to be me improving myself and building myself up in these challenging ways. But the world can manifest itself in a negative way, in terms of, if I do get to that point where I think I'm the alpha, I'm going to think that I'm above everybody else, and the world is going to be my perception of the world is that other people are inferior to me and below me, and they don't necessarily deserve my respect. That could be one risk that kind of comes to mind for me. There's probably some more general risks that happens to a lot of people, but I think it's something along the lines of that.
Yeah. So in terms of Jordan Peterson, what do you think of the other important parts of his philosophy? So he talks about, in his future authoring program, about how you should strategize goals for different areas of your life. I think there's 5 or 6 different areas. So it's your career, your relationships. Relationships could be split into your family, friends, or an intimate relationship. And then the way you spend your free time, and the way you manage temptations like drugs and alcohol. I think those are the key areas. So what do you think? I guess a question would be, what's the most important out of those areas? And there's always a debate over whether it's worth optimizing for one, for example, going all in on your career to the detriment of others. Have you got any intuitions about what the best path there would be?
My intuition would kind of be to average yourself out on all of them. I remember I saw a video the other day of some guy talking, and I think he was talking about in terms of combat, let's say there's 4 categories, takedowns, striking, submissions, and I don't know, knockouts, whatever. If you're a 10 out of 10 in striking, but you're a fucking 4 out of 10 in all the others, you might be the best in terms of striking, but there's always a chance you're going to get fucking submitted or taken down or whatever, and this and that. And it's kind of better for a person to average themselves out and be 7 out of 10 across all the board, because you give yourself a better fighting chance.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of career, family, free time and stuff like that, I'd say in my mind it would be maybe family, because throughout time, the whole history of the species has been kind of centered around the family. It's become a little bit distant in terms of recent years. Like people are kind of able to move away from home at like large, like in terms of just simply more physically. Like we can go across the seas and more easily and move away to another country. Although we have like technology to keep us in contact more, I feel like we're kind of a bit more dissociated from our family than we used to be. It used to be like family values over everything back in the day. That was kind of like more of a survival thing as well, but I think that's so embedded in people that should be like the thing that should be focused on the most.
Yeah.
Because like, in the end, if you're wanting to serve yourself and your family the best, you're going to want to be able to have a good career. You're going to want to be able to spend your free time wisely, because all those things will accumulate to serving your family best.
Yeah, that's true. So you need to kind of have a well-rounded life in order to serve your family. So kind of hits both points if that's your biggest priority. And how much do you think having a priority is important? Because I feel like as humans in the pursuit of things, we need to kind of have a hierarchy of values where something is at the top, where you have a priority, that you have a guiding principle to live by. And perhaps this is something we might get deeper into later in the episode, but do you think it's important to have perhaps a goal as the guiding as the thing you prioritize the most, and that acts as your guiding principle? Or perhaps you could have maybe kind of a deeper ingrained goal which encompasses everything, like this is going to be very broad, but like just being a good person or making the most of your potential. Like these are broad goals, but like those could act as kind of a guiding principle, and then obviously you have the specific goals you want to work on underneath that. So how important do you think it is to have that hierarchy where you have ultimately a guiding, either a highest goal that you make decisions by, or a guiding principle?
I think it's very important for most people. It's interesting that you asked that. Like recently I watched a video, or I saw a video or something on this idea. I can't remember whose idea it was, but this person, I think he was prominent enough, but it was talking about how life is filled with so many things, and like it seems that time goes so fast and everyone's almost too busy to do anything. But this person was kind of promoting the idea that we should just slow down our lives and have more free time in our day. Like we don't need to busy ourselves with all these tasks, and it's important for humans to just be able to sit by themselves for like passages of time and not really think about anything. And that kind of goes against, I don't know if it goes against it, but it seems to be in conflict with this idea of self-improvement, because with the general idea of self-improvement is the idea that you need to be working as much as you can throughout your day and week and month and year and life in order to achieve the most success. So I think I would say people should try and be successful, because that is what like contributes to progress for them, the people around them, and then like the wider community and like just the population as a whole. And with success, you need to have that higher value to go for. But I do also think it's important to. I think it can work in tandem with this idea that people can just have days where they just relax and do nothing, and it's the art of just nothingness. What are you like? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I don't think it necessarily has to go in conflict with this idea of goal setting, because you might decide something important to you is to, for example, a goal you have is to improve your mental health, and if you think, or to be happier, and then you can strategize to make that goal. Like you're like, okay, I know if I'm too overly focused on my career, then that affects my happiness. So a goal could be to make sure to schedule some free time where you don't have to think about those things and where you can enjoy life more. So it's not necessarily about having to have this solid goal of being successful and achieving these massive feats. It's more about just deciding what you want from life and then strategizing to work towards it. So I don't think it necessarily discriminates against something like that. Although, you know, if you really go down the route of like the Buddhist type thinking where like desire is suffering, like to have a goal and to want something and to think about how you could improve your life can be a painful process, because you realize that your life is insufficient right now and you want more. So it could be argued that even that process in and of itself is, you know, going in the opposite direction to what maybe like a Buddhist philosophy would say, where you should be just present to the moment, and you should, if you want to avoid suffering, you should let go of desire. But ultimately, you know, my belief system, I do think it is important to pursue things into like a core component of life which will make you feel fulfilled, is fulfilling your potential, and working towards your potential throughout your life. And sometimes that will cause some suffering, but I think it's ultimately worth it. What do you think about that idea of, you know, kind of the Eastern idea of letting go of your desires to avoid suffering versus, you know, desiring a better life and working towards that being an important part of fulfillment?
I think desire is an important part of fulfillment, because like the Buddhists say like desire is suffering, but like I might be misquoting them or like interpreting their religion wrong, but they kind of also say that life is suffering at the same time. And to appreciate life, like you need to appreciate everything that kind of comes with it. And like a massive part of that is just being unsatisfied and like having these negative feelings and emotions because of your situation. And I think they're very, very important to, like you said, motivate yourself to attain something that's going to improve what you have now into something better. But okay, but like what I want to ask you is, in terms of like goals and stuff, do you think it's necessary to have that overarching goal in order to set small, achievable goals, or can a person kind of just set small goals incrementally as they go along, without like an overarching theme? Like, what do you think is possible to do that, or do you think there's a necessity to have this like golden dream of like what you should be in order to direct the small incremental goals you want to set?
Yeah, I think it is possible to, and it might be the best strategy for certain people, just to set small goals and like small incremental tasks that they need to do, and just achieving those and working that way. But I'd say that's most appropriate in situations where, like, sometimes someone is so down bad that they just need to start building a little bit of momentum, and they might find it difficult to visualize what kind of life they want because they just don't know, and they kind of lack the motivation. So for that person, it might be best just to focus on the very small tasks and just focusing on what they can do today, having a good day, having a productive next hour, as opposed to focusing on the bigger goal. But I think ultimately it is good to have this overarching goal which guides your smaller goals, because I think it allows you to connect the individual task you're doing to a bigger goal, and that will lead you to be more motivated to do the smaller task. And there's been studies which kind of show this, where people, I learned this from Andrew Huberman, where people can be doing the exact same task, but depending on their framing of it, they'll get a completely different response in terms of dopamine. So a person whose frame for a task is that they don't believe it's that valuable and they have no real reason to do it, when they do the task, they won't really get any kind of dopamine hit from that. Whereas someone could be doing the exact same task, but if they believe it's important and linked to some bigger goal, then they'll get a bigger dopamine hit from that. So I think it is useful when working towards your goals to have kind of an overarching thing that you're aiming towards.
Yeah, I think that might also kind of relate back to what Jordan Peterson was talking about in terms of when you have this aim, the world can reconfigure itself, and the way you perceive it changes, and hopefully changes in a positive way. And maybe that's like a physiological like evidence of it.
Yeah, I think it is, because I feel like when you have a bigger vision, you can kind of just, and especially when you start working towards that and getting some progress, you do just have a more positive outlook on life, that you think about possibilities for the future and you do just feel more optimistic about it. Whereas if you're in a stage where you don't really have any direction and you think about the future, then I think it leads to a lot of pessimism. So yeah, I definitely think that's a way kind of you perceive the world changing around you.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I remember we talked about that in the dopamine episode. And I would sometimes, like, when I need to go training, I just really can't be asked to cycle there. I just like don't want to go because it's just a bit of an effort getting there. But then I remember you saying that, and I was like, right, if I just think about ahead of time, once I finish that session, I'm going to feel so much better after exerting myself for a little bit and getting sweaty and hot. And like, it just gives you that little boost of energy to just get ready and go.
Yeah.
And it made like a big difference to me, to be fair.
That's good. Yeah. Anything more to say about Jordan, or should we move on?
One thing that I thought was interesting at the start of the video, I heard him talk about, he said, when it comes to self-improvement, like, there's kind of the question of like how and where and when and stuff, but he wanted to like take it back a step and say a person needs to ask themselves why bother trying to improve my own life. And like, a lot of people might think, oh, like, I don't really care about improving myself, I don't really have a care for myself, like, what's the point? But he says, like, you need to improve yourself to stop suffering stupidly more than you have to, and that, like, you should help stop others people around you suffering as well. Although sometimes you might not care about your suffering, if you are in pain, that is inherent evidence that you are motivated to improve the situation. And like, although you might feel like you just can't be asked to go to the gym because, like, why do you care about being fit and healthy or like aesthetic? You have these negative emotions because you do care. I think people need to kind of just be truthful with themselves. And one thing that also that Peterson says is, like, people will avoid setting goals because they're afraid of failing them. I think we might have discussed this in the past, but I think that's important. Do you think even if a goal might seem unattainable, it should be set, because just the act of trying to get there and failing is better than not trying?
Yeah. There's this Nietzsche quote which I think encompasses this perfectly. So I'm going to get it up. Here we go. I know of no better life purpose than to perish in attempting the great and the impossible. So, yeah, I think there is great value in setting a goal, even if it seems unattainable, because ultimately that's going to probably take you further than you believed you could go in the first place, or that anyone rational could believe you'd go in the first place. And yeah, but obviously there's a balance to be had, because something Jordan Peterson talks about is how you need to set a goal big enough so that it motivates you, but small enough so you actually do it. So the risk in setting a massive goal is it might seem disconnected from the small tasks that you're doing, and if it's out of your reach, then you're not, and you don't end up working towards and achieving it, then you never build up that positive momentum, which might allow you to achieve that goal in the long term. So yeah, there is a balance to be had, but I do think I do think there is great power in setting a goal which, you know, is beyond what would be maybe rational or seem possible with your current scope, because you don't know what the future can hold and given progress over time. But once again, that comes back to the incremental progress. But I think having a big goal can motivate you a lot. And, you know, we've hit on a couple points here which I think lead into David Goggins' philosophy a lot. So that Nietzsche quote, I actually heard it was a podcast with Modern Wisdom podcast with David Goggins on it, and Chris Williamson read this quote because it kind of encompasses a lot of the things that David Goggins has done in terms of, like, he ran, I think he ran a 240-mile race with basically no cartilage in his knees, or with like a torn ACL or just something ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, just incredible feats that most people would say is impossible. And when he broke the pull-up record for most pull-ups in 24 hours, like, a lot of people were telling him that was impossible, and he failed a couple of times doing that, and it looked like he just didn't have the capabilities inside to do it, but he was willing to go past the limits of what seems possible. And that kind of demonstrates the power of the human mind. So yeah, I think that's an important point, which links into David Goggins about what you were saying about aiming for the impossible being such a good thing.
Yeah, shoot for the moon, land in the stars, as they say.
Yeah. And yeah, so another thing, actually, we touched upon suffering a couple of times. So about how potentially desire is suffering, and perhaps one path to self-improvement might be to let go of desire. But I feel like from a different perspective, and perhaps even a different definition of suffering, David Goggins' philosophy is to embrace suffering. And I think this echoes Jordan Peterson's philosophy as well, to voluntarily take on suffering and the burdens of life. And, you know, David Goggins does this through doing extremely difficult tasks, extremely difficult physical feats, which cause a lot of physical suffering, which is extremely difficult. So I'll let you talk about, like, what do you think are the direct benefits of suffering in and of itself?
I think benefits of suffering seem to be suffering kind of people kind of see as like a negative thing, but it also comes through the positive act of, like, trying to improve oneself. Like when you're working out to become stronger, or you're revising to become more knowledgeable, or anything like along those sort of lines. The first part of this, like the first stages of that feat, are kind of quite easy. It's almost like a bit of a warm up, get into the more challenging parts of it. And then towards the end is where it becomes suffering. It becomes difficult. After like 3 hours in the gym, you're kind of getting burnt out, and it's like you're just finding it difficult to focus and stuff. And like if you're in the gym, towards the end of the workout is where you're most tired, or where like towards the end of the set is where your muscles are like most getting shut down. That is when the suffering occurs most, but that's also where the progress and the growth occurs as well. It seems that suffering, it kind of goes hand in hand a lot of the time with growth. Although, like, don't get me wrong, like there is suffering where it just does cause harm. That's more so, I think, on like a mental level. Like if someone's in a bit of an abusive relationship, or they have this, I don't know, they're kind of held captive, or it could be anything, like suffering and those sort of things doesn't necessarily bring progress with it inherently, unless like your perspective on it is quite mature and like wise. A bit like I think it was it Dostoevsky, or not Dostoevsky. Who wrote the Gulag Archipelago?
Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Solzhenitsyn, that was it. Like suffering in the fucking camps or the Gulag. I don't think in hand it brings growth and progress. But when you have like the right mindset, it definitely can enhance your idea of what it is to be alive and what the meaning of life is. So yeah, that's kind of my general idea on it. Suffering kind of brings about the opportunity for growth as long as you have the right idea and mindset towards what suffering is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point actually, because what I was getting at was more voluntarily choosing to suffer. So, and you spoke about their situations where people have suffered through no fault of their own, and it's not their own choice. But it's interesting because obviously, I wouldn't wish bad situations. Like you mentioned there, like an abusive relationship, like I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But, it's interesting to think that despite that suffering, or maybe even because of that suffering, with the correct mindset and the correct way of handling it, it could actually lead to growth and be a positive thing in the long term, which, I wouldn't say that's an overarching thing. Like it's too like kind of blindly optimistic, I think, to say that all suffering with the right mindset will lead to positive outcomes, because, I just don't think that's true in all circumstances. But perhaps, in these situations of involuntary suffering, you don't have a choice about whether you're going to suffer or not, but you do have a choice over the mindset you're going to have when dealing with it, and the way you decide to think about it, and the frame you create in your mind. And perhaps, even if you can't, it'd be too convenient to say that, oh, it just takes your mindset and it'll be a positive outcome. But perhaps, even if it is a shit situation and you might be guaranteed a shit outcome, perhaps the best possible outcome still comes from having a mindset which embraces the growth that comes from suffering and is even in some ways grateful for it.
Yeah, I think this might sound a little bit out of touch maybe, but kind of linking back to Nietzsche and stuff, like the idea of, not the idea, but like if a person goes through involuntary suffering, I think for most people it's going to be difficult to perceive it in the right way and like take responsibility of your own actions and kind of use it as a growth motivator. And I think that probably comes down to my belief in Nietzsche's teachings, and I believe most people, and maybe myself included, will just simply be a sheep and not necessarily become a higher man. And because of that, people that go through involuntary suffering, most of them will kind of just succumb to the trauma that brings, and they won't necessarily be able to perceive it in the right way. And I know that could be a bit out of touch, and I might be wrong in that, but linking those two ideas together, I think that's maybe why a lot of people find it difficult to deal with real trauma that like they had no control over. And it's not to say that they're like a less of a person, because like unless you've been through that, you don't understand what it's like, and it's difficult for me or anyone that's not been through it to give an opinion on it, because I'm not versed in that world in terms of that person suffering, so I can't give like a very viable judgment.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But to be fair, I would, myself, I'm optimistic that kind of each individual does have the capacity to confront the challenges of life forthrightly, and kind of the best outcomes will happen from that, even out of a bad situation. Even if it ends badly, like something tragic, like you get cancer or something, you get terminal cancer, and there's nothing you can do. You can still live the rest of your life in an honourable way and pass with your head high because you lived properly, even given a difficult circumstance. And I do believe that, people do have the capacity, perhaps everyone does have the capacity to do that. And even if the outcome is guaranteed to be bad and you don't have control over it, it's still, through the suffering, you can still, live out your potential and rise to the occasion and be the person that you could be, even in a difficult time, which is, even if a bad outcome is guaranteed. So, yeah.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I agree with you, actually. Yeah.
So yeah, we went off on a bit of a tangent there, kind of about involuntary suffering and how perhaps a proper mindset is always, which embraces and confronts the suffering and looks for the best outcome, even if the outcome might still be bad anyway. Why a good mindset can still be a good thing, but what I was getting at with David Goggins was more about voluntary suffering. And something I've thought about before is I've often seen the like you think about a goal you have, and you think about a task to get towards that goal, and you think, let's say you want to take a cold shower, or you've got this work to do and you need to do some difficult work that strains your mind, and it's kind of suffering in that context. So a way that I think is kind of intuitive to think about it is that I have this goal that I want to achieve, and but the negative part of it is I have to go through this suffering in order to achieve it. Like that's like a price to pay, which is a bad thing, which in an ideal world you would just be able to get the goal without the suffering, but I can't do that, so you have to go through the suffering. So this suffering is like an undesired part of the pursuit. But I think a more powerful mindset to have is to look at a situation and think, I'm going to, so there's this goal I want to achieve, and the suffering on the way is actually the content which is going to help me to grow. Like the suffering in and of itself isn't an undesired byproduct of wanting to achieve your goals. It's actually the means to which you can strengthen your mind and become a more capable person. So it's not just that, you made the point earlier, which I think is important to realize that, so one reason to go through suffering and difficulty is to achieve goals, because realistically any goal worth achieving is going to require some degree of sacrifice or suffering. That's just kind of a fact of life. But I think it's a powerful way of seeing things, so rather than having this goal and seeing the suffering as part of it, which you don't want to go through, rather to have a goal and to see the suffering as an important as a crucial element in terms of your growth, and the suffering in and of itself can help your growth. And I've heard Andrew Huberman talk about this, about how if you can embrace a mindset which realizes difficulty and suffering as a means to growth, then when you encounter that situation and you think those thoughts like, this suffering is going to help me grow, it will give you a dopamine kick, which is more likely to help you get through that suffering. So yeah, I think that's a powerful mindset to have.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, it goes back to that kind of, what's that saying? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Like, appreciating that each step you have to take is one that you should be happy taking, because it eventually gets you to that place you want to be.
Yeah. How has so you're a follower of David Goggins as well? What would you say are the things that David Goggins has taught you, or that's had an impact on you?
I'd say, to be fair, before, like today, I watched a video, and it's kind of it was a video, and he was talking, and I hadn't really seen him talk like this before. So before watching this video, David Goggins' teachings was more, or to me, it's about killing the inner bitch, like facing up to your demons, and like those demons would be something along the lines of the voice inside your head saying, "Go, be comfortable, don't do this hard thing," and stuff like that. Goggins' teaching, in my mind, was always about just stop being a little bitch, push a little bit harder when you're like in the gym or like doing this or doing that. But today I watched the video and he was talking more on the emotional side, but it was obviously still David Goggins style. But he said, like, the most important conversation you'll have in life is the conversation you have with yourself. And it's also like, it's about like, what dialogue do you want to have with yourself? Like, do you want to have a dialogue along the lines of, "Oh, I'm a loser, I'm ugly, I'm fat," and all these sort of things? Or do you want to converse with yourself in a way that you say, "Yeah, I might be that, but I'm going to fucking work and be better than that and improve myself"? It's just it's interesting. Like, Goggins is such a fucking one in 8 billion, realistically. Well, maybe 1 in like 4 or 2 billion. There's probably a few people like him, but he's just so unique, especially because he wasn't born this way. All the odds are kind of stacked up against him. And he just amazes me most of the time. Do you have any like main messages that you've taken away from him?
Yeah, to what you said there about how he wasn't born this way, like he was a person who had a lot of disadvantages in his life, and perhaps he's an example of someone who suffered a lot in his childhood. For people that don't know much about his life, his dad was very abusive and beat him as a child, and there were a lot of other tragic things that happened to him when he was younger. But he decided that he wasn't going to blame the circumstances for the fact that his life wasn't the way it wanted to be. And the way that manifested for him was, he was able to go out and do all these incredible things and fulfill his potential. And he's still improving on that. Whereas, he spoke about how he imagines what if he had decided when he was 20 years old, 21 years old or whatever it was, and he was ridiculously overweight. Like, had he have decided that the reason his life wasn't the way he wanted to be was because of the shit circumstances he ended up in, he would have stayed as that person who had some shit job as a exterminator of, like, he used to go to restaurants and get rid of like pests, and that was his job, and he was ridiculously overweight and he hadn't really achieved much with his life. Like, had he have taken that attitude that this suffering was the reason he wasn't able to become the person he eventually has become, then he would have died that overweight person and just never made much of his potential. And I think his real mission is seeing what the human mind is capable of and seeing what his potential is. So yeah, I think, he's had a big impact on me as well. And yeah, it's important to realize that, even though you've suffered in the past, you need to take responsibility for that. And, and that's actually one of the biggest things about him as well. He always takes complete responsibility for how things go. So an example is in one of his ultra marathons, he had this pacer who was supposed to lead him in the right direction. And he took him off course, like many miles. And then they found out and had to run back that distance and then continue running. And in that situation, he could have blamed that person because they were supposed to keep the directions and they messed up. But he took responsibility for the situation and said that, this is my race, I shouldn't leave it in someone else's hands to make sure I'm on the right directions. I should have been checking it myself. And he also realised that practically in that situation, had he freaked out and had a go at this person for taking them the wrong way, then it would have just reduced the morale of the team and wouldn't have had a positive impact. So he took responsibility for the situation and started making progress forward. And taking responsibility is something that Jordan Peterson talks about a lot, and is probably another key pillar of self-improvement.
One thing that I thought was interesting when he was talking in that video was like, obviously David Goggins is like thought of in high regard for a lot of people that know him because of like just who he is and stuff. In a lot of videos, you won't necessarily see him smile and stuff, and he doesn't necessarily seem like the happiest guy. But it was interesting in the video, he said like he doesn't smile that often because he doesn't feel the need to. And the reason is because he says his sense of accomplishment is so deeply embedded in his heart that he doesn't need to share it with other people. And he's got that sense of accomplishment through decades of just absolutely grinding and testing his mind and like pushing himself to the absolute limits of his physical ability. So he doesn't feel the need to present himself to other people as happy because he feels so accomplished in himself. And do you think everybody can get to a point like that? I don't think most people get to the same level as David Goggins, and I don't think it's necessary for people to get to that same level. But do you think people can be? Do you think that's maybe where contentment kind of comes from? Like there's a Buddhist idea that you should just kind of be content with the life you have and stuff, or like something along those lines. But Goggins' sense of happiness comes through just the pure hard work that he's put in for years. Do you think if everyone done that, they would kind of feel content? Or is there like a risk of people, like you see it in movies, and I think it happens in life, a lot of people achieve their success, and once they get to that success, they kind of become even more unhappy than before when they didn't have any success?
Yeah, I think it'll be different for different people and certain people, but for everyone, I think setting goals and imagining a life you want and strategizing towards that is always going to be a good thing. And they don't know, and not everyone has to take it as far as Goggins does. But if you just think about a life you want and then make some plans to work towards that, like in a year or two time after that, you'll be thinking, this is like your life will be better off for it. And I think you'll feel more fulfilled and as if you're on a better path. So I do think it applies to everyone. And it's interesting there, you spoke about how Goggins kind of has this deep sense of contentment. And I've heard him talk about because he has some heart issues. So he was born with the hole in his heart. So that makes, the things he's achieved even more impressive. But I think it was to do with that when he found that out, like there was some question about whether the condition he found himself in might kill him, and he was really ill and could barely get out of bed. And at this point, he had done all the Navy SEAL shit and run a few ultra marathons and stuff, and he was lying there in his bed. And he thought, like, if this ends up killing him, then he would be completely content with that because he knows what he's done with his life. And he referenced how I think there's some sort of monks that basically they run like a marathon every day for a year or something with the hope of finding enlightenment through suffering. And I think that's, the same thing that David Goggins has done. And he's reached this sense of contentment about what he's achieved in his life. And that's come through the suffering. And I think there is, something to be said about the meaning of life being found through suffering. And, perhaps you do have to take it really far before you realize that. Like he got to the end of one of his ultra marathons, one of the toughest ones he's done, and then his wife's like, "Oh, we need to take you to the hospital," and then he's just like, "No, I want to feel this pain," because he knows what he's done and he shouldn't have been able to achieve what he did. But he went through so much suffering to do it, but it shows what he's capable of. So yeah, in terms of David Goggins, I think, people can translate some of his lessons into their life, and I think aiming towards improvement and embracing a certain amount of suffering and difficulty will give you a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, he's just a fucking crazy guy. One thing although earlier I said how Goggins says you need to have a positive dialogue with yourself, he also says it's very important to be really truthful with yourself. In order to have any sort of improvement in your life, you need to, improvement is having a point to which you want to get. The only way to get to that point is knowing the point you are at, is knowing where you are now. So he says it's very important to be truthful about your situation. People will have these insecurities that they're fat or they're dumb or they're weak, and he says you need to be truthful and be honest with yourself and say, yeah, I am dumb, or I am overweight, or I am weak. But there's always that but there, that you can get better, and I think that's important. I think maybe self-improvement, people online, the people that kind of take advantage of people looking for these sort of teachings, it seems like a lot of them might use the idea of positive affirmations and oh, you are better, you are good who you are, improve yourself by appreciating yourself more. And I think that's got its benefits, but people need to be completely honest with the situation they're in, otherwise they can't direct themselves in any sort of positive way.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to taking complete responsibility for the situation you find it in, and that comes through radical honesty with yourself. And you kind of it's something that would take the power away from a bully, for example. If you took complete ownership for your insufficiencies, what people say to you can't hurt you, because and you admit these negative things about you, and you're not trying to hide away from them. So I do think that complete honesty and taking accountability for your situation is a really important part of improvement. And it's a good point you make there about how, part of the self-improvement space online is encouraging people to do affirmations and stuff to feel better about themselves and believe in themselves more, which could have some benefits. But at the same time, I sometimes think about for myself about whether certain negative emotions are actually ultimately a positive thing, because they drive me to improve. So, if I feel some negative emotions, some sadness or anxiety, it's not because there's something, it's not because there's something wrong with my brain that I'm feeling these emotions. They're just indicators that, there's more I could be doing, or I feel bad about mistakes I've made. But I think it's, it can be a good tool to start trying to see your negative emotions as positive things, in that they're indicators for the direction you need to go. And the fact that you feel upset right now is an indicator that it should be motivation to change in the future, not something that you see as a innate problem with you.
Yeah, I think the positive affirmations are important, but I think they need to be more focused on appreciating the effort. I started going to the gym 2 months ago again for the first time in a while, and I could be thinking to myself, positively affirming myself, you're not as weak as you thought, or you're still aesthetic, or all these weird things. But that might not, like you said, that might not have that push and pull motivation to make me work hard. Whereas if I just have this positive affirmation of oh, I'm happy that I'm going to the gym, even if I'm a little bit embarrassed because I don't know how to use every machine, or I'm looking like a bit of a fool. because I don't know how to do this exercise or that exercise. The positive affirmation of being happy with just simply showing up and building that habit is more important than like trying to affirm yourself as like this new identity almost. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it depends how you use it. So if you gave the example of going to the gym there, if you go to the gym and you don't feel, you might feel slightly incompetent, for certain people that might make them think, you know what, this just isn't for me, I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to go anymore. But I think it can be a good thing if you're able to see that negative emotion as actually like, oh right, I've realized something I'm not good at, and realized something that I'm incompetent at, and you should see that as an opportunity to improve rather than something to avoid.
Yeah, 100%.
So moving on to another thinker, I think who has a lot in common with David Goggins, which is Jocko Willink. And I'd say the key component of his philosophy, which when you look across, when I look at successful people, I think one of the key components that they all have in common is discipline, which can be defined as the ability to do what you should do regardless of how you feel about it. And I think the reason this is common, this is a common trait of something all kind of successful people preach, or the majority of successful people and these type of people that we've been talking about so far, is in order to achieve something, you're going to need to do difficult things, and you're not always going to feel like doing those difficult things. But being able to act in spite of how you feel is going to allow you to be consistent and to outwork the person who only does it when they feel like doing it. So yeah, I feel like discipline is essential to achieving almost any goal, even if it's something like we spoke about for a certain person, like taking some time off work and just to do nothing, sparing a day. It might be part of their goal to improve their mental health. But for that person, it still takes discipline to, set aside that day and not fall back into their old habits of checking things, or like going on their phone too much and just kind of being mindless, or going back to working feeling like they need to. Like even that takes discipline. So yeah, I think discipline is an important part of any goal. So what do you think the role of discipline is in self-improvement?
I think once people kind of realise, like you're saying, that discipline is the common denominator for almost every sort of person that's successful in life. I mean, actually, not even almost any. I think every single person that is successful has some level of discipline, unless that success comes from like inheriting it from like a dead family member. But that's not really success. That's just like luck almost. Like you're saying, discipline is the ultimate thing that gets you success. I think once people realise that, they can hopefully understand that the path to being the best version of yourself isn't an easy thing you can like hack and cheat. It's just an absolute long mission that just takes time and effort. And although that isn't like a nice way of presenting how to improve yourself, because it's a little bit like, oh fucking hell, one has to just work for this, that is the simple reality and truth of it, and people need to kind of realise that, and myself included. Sometimes I feel like I can kind of get away with cutting this corner, cutting that corner, and I'll still be all right in the end, but that doesn't serve me well in the long term. And I think if I had a true understanding of discipline and the freedom it does bring over the long term, I would maybe stop cutting corners as much in different aspects of my life.
Yeah, I held back a little bit myself, making the overarching statement of all successful people require discipline. And I kind of thought about potentially some like artistic types who have kind of a more relaxed view of life. And maybe even potentially people who are less conscientious, but they're still like happy people with good amounts of positive emotion. Like they can have quite potentially happy and fulfilled lives without really having to discipline themselves or do difficult things, or in a situation where people are passionate about something, like their passion just drives them and they just do the thing they need to do when they want to, which is most of the time because they love it, and they spend the rest of their time doing whatever, and as long as they don't have and as long as they don't have any too bad habits, and they're likely to have a fulfilling life. But potentially even with those people, like if they want to optimize their success or how happy they are in life, like they are still going to require some amounts of discipline. Like you take an artist, for example, or different creative type of people, like you could argue that those types of things sometimes require the most discipline, because you need to kind of sit down and force yourself to do it every day in order to have like the creative, to create like a baseline of opportunity for creative things to happen. Where if you don't have the discipline to sit down and to start working on your creative endeavor, then that creativity will never really flow. And it could be like people might be athletes and they might be really passionate about their sport, but there's still probably going to be times, if they're training as hard as they can, where they don't feel like doing it because it's difficult, and that's where the discipline comes in. So yeah, potentially you could make the overarching statement that discipline is essential for all successful people. And I can I resonate with what you were saying there about kind of feeling like I need to implement more discipline into my life, because I look at these successful people and it seems to be something they all have in common. Yet there's times where I personally, maybe I have work to do, but I don't feel like doing it, or maybe like I've got some other negative emotion and I decide not to do it, even though that's the work I've set out for myself and that's the work I should be doing. So and there's other examples. Maybe there's the opportunity to do something fun and exciting, but it takes away from the pursuit of one of my goals, and I choose that direction maybe a little bit too much, rather than doing the disciplined things of sacrificing that type of thing. And I do think that's something I definitely need to work on as well.
Yeah, just to kind of maybe change what I said, but like I still believe every successful person needs discipline to be successful. But I think there's like a way of wording it better, or like understanding it better, would be, like you said, the example of artists that have this kind of laid back lifestyle, and they kind of got lucky where their passion and the art they produce is what makes them money and makes them successful. Although those people are successful in comparable terms to other people, I don't think they are as successful as they could be if they had that true discipline. Like if that artist did have that true discipline to be even more successful, then they could just have this huge amount of success that they're not living up to. So I do think discipline is absolutely required for each individual to achieve their most maximum amount of success.
To maximize their potential. Yeah.
Like one example I thought of just then was like, there's this artist called David Cho. You might have seen clips of him online. He's like a painter artist and stuff, and he ended up painting like a mural inside Facebook's first like office. And he didn't get paid in cash, he got paid in stocks, and his stocks got to a valuation of like hundreds of millions of dollars. Like he might not have had discipline in his life, and he kind of just got lucky and got hundreds of millions of dollars and became really successful. But even with that money and stuff, like I think he's done like a few he's done a few Vice documentaries and stuff, and he's had the discipline to like still push forward to explore different parts of the world. And although he has that money and that's successful, the success to him isn't about necessarily the money. It's more about exploring the world, and that's what his kind of like joy is in life. So maybe like, although artists can make a lot of money from their art, I don't necessarily think that means that they're successful.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fair point. And on the topic of Jocko, so he's got this very famous clip about where he's like, good, and it's like, oh, you didn't get the promotion, good, you didn't, I don't know, your wife's left you, good. I don't know, I don't think he said that, but it's basically
people, good.
yeah. Yeah, we won't take that any further, but yeah, he basically lists off a bunch of bad things, that things that would seemingly be bad, and then he just says good afterwards. And like, he talks about how I think it was when he was working as a SEAL, like one of his people working below him comes up to him and then starts explaining this massive problem that they have, and then Jocko's just there like smirking or something. Then he's like, well, I already know what you're going to say. You're going to say good. And but I think that echoes kind of the attitude about embracing the hardship and difficulty of things more than the outcome that we've been talking about, and associating, as Andrew Huberman would put it, overcoming that limbic friction, which is the part inside you that wants to kind of take the easy route, whether that be staying in bed when you should get up, or just doing or avoiding just doing a hard thing in general. Like this thing of saying when a bad thing happens, it's good, kind of encourages this idea of taking on challenges, and the fact that they're difficult is what leads to the growth and improvement, and what benefits your mind and allows you to grow as a person.
Yeah, just taking that responsibility. Although, like, is it always necessary to think of it as good, or like we said earlier, having that push factor away from the bad can also be a motivating factor that is, well, I guess that is inherently good. So maybe it is always good, I guess. Yeah, I guess it is always good.
Yeah, because I feel like, I mean, you wouldn't want to take it like, oh, this problem is good, oh, I won't solve it then. That's
no.
But the thing which is good is the fact that there is a problem to overcome. So yeah, I do think it, it's probably a fantastic attitude to have with basically all challenges in life.
Yeah. And I think it's also simply, if you just think, like we were saying earlier with Jordan Peterson's idea of the way you aim and orient yourself makes the world orient itself in a different way. If Jocko's always thinking this shit's good, then surely his whole life is good.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Also another massive thing that you'll see with Jocko talk about is the idea and the acts of like detachment. He said that it's important to also see other people's perspectives. How important do you think it kind of is to detach yourself? I think it's important to detach yourself and like get away from your emotions and think through how you can logically respond to the situation. But like, do you think it's that important to always see other people's perspectives and detach in that way?
Yeah, I think it is important to always see their perspectives, because you don't necessarily need to agree with it, but even if you don't agree with them, you need to understand where they're coming from. And ultimately, even if you don't agree with them, it makes your perspective stronger and your opinion on things stronger, because it means you've considered different things rather than just sticking to what you currently think and not considering what other people think. Whereas if you consider it, then there might be something important in there, because even if someone's criticizing you and they say a lot of mean things about you, they might say 10 mean things about you, but one of them's actually like constructive and something that is wrong with you. Because if people only compliment you all the time, they're never going to tell you what's wrong with you. So seeing, even in a situation where it seems negative, to take someone's opinion into account, there can actually be benefits there.
Yeah.
But even if their opinion is wrong, then it's important, to detach and to be able to see things from other people's perspectives. and then you'll be able to realize, like, oh, the perspective this person's coming from, like the mindset they're in is a mindset of negativity for these reasons, and like what they're saying is just projecting negativity and doesn't have any value to me. Like, that's an important thing to realize, whereas you can't really realize that if you kind of just block it out and just stay in your own heads too much. So yeah, I think detachment and being able to take other people's opinions into account is very important part of being a leader and being a good team player and ultimately achieving what you want personally in your life. And I think this kind of so detachment is like is a trait. So you can have goals to work towards actual things. So you might have a goal to get a promotion, or you might have a goal to build some muscle or to lift a certain amount of weight in the gym. And you can have these different goals, but you can also have goals, for example, about your traits. So one of your traits might be to, become to improve your leadership. And part of that might be detachment. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other traits that, being able to detach probably makes you more emotionally stable, and it helps other traits. But, overall, so what do you think is the value of setting concrete goals, like getting a promotion in your career, and through working towards that goal, you develop your personality traits, versus setting goals to develop certain traits and then strategizing what task you can do to pursue that?
Ooh, that's interesting. I think both should work at the same time. Like, I think most people could agree on like a set number of traits that will serve them in all aspects of their life and all types of careers. In saying that, though, there is also certain traits that will be more applicable to more niche areas of life. So my advice would be figure out what you believe, as well as what the general consensus is on what traits are going to serve everybody in every sort of situation, and try and work towards those traits, and then that will end up serving you in the future. And at the same time, have a more specific goal of, I want this job and I need to have this skill or this behavior or whatever, and then work towards that. That's what I'd say, I think. What about you?
Yeah, I think both setting goals and in terms of what you want your life to be like, and then in terms of traits, are both important. And I've come across this kind of like split between these two things, like going through setting my own goals and going through Jordan Peterson's future authoring program, for example. So you can set goals for two. You can have a vision for two things. One is what you want your life to be like, and one is the type of person you want to be. And obviously those things are intertwined, but yeah, I think it's probably important to set goals for both, because perhaps if you purely focus on things you want to achieve in the external world, then you might miss out on considering the type of person you want to be. And maybe if to achieve a goal you have to become a person that you don't want to be, then it isn't worth sacrificing that.
Right.
And I'm trying to think if there's a downside to only focusing on traits. Perhaps you don't see as much progress in your actual life, and you might just, become too attached to like becoming a certain way when but to be honest, setting goals for traits might work as long as it comes with as in like not setting goals for traits kind of as opposed to setting goals in real life might work, because in order to, let's say, to improve your leadership skills, like that, like the tasks involved in that are going to be things which help further your career, for example. So yeah, I think it's probably important to have an awareness of both, and I think both can kind of complement each other. But yeah, definitely important just to to also have an idea of the type of person you want to be, not just the things you want in your life.
Right. Yeah. There's no point in sacrificing your character for some external like reward, because then you just won't be happy.
Yeah, because ultimately, I think the most important thing is becoming the person you want to be and becoming a better person, and pursuing external goals is a means to doing that. And obviously, it's important to improve your life. Like, if you want to be happy, you want certain things in your life, and you probably need to go out and achieve them. So yeah, it's probably important to focus on both, and they complement each other well.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I never really thought about that, because it's always, not always, but like you just see online a lot, oh, you need to become this person who has their own business, who makes loads of money and stuff like that, but then people don't necessarily tell you about what it means to get that, because you need to change as a person. Well, you might already be that type of person, but like the people who become these hyper successful people and billionaires and stuff, a common thing between all of them is that a lot of the time they sacrifice time with their family, and that kind of that's sometimes a sacrifice worth making for a lot of people. But I think for also another lot of people, it's not a sacrifice they do want to make. Being aware of that's important, and I never thought about that until you said it just then.
Yeah. Is there any other lessons from Jocko that you think are important?
No, I think it's just the general theme of there's no one thing that's going to make your life better. It's just a long campaign that you have to do, and it's just the discipline each day that's going to get you to the point you want to get to.
Yeah,
kind of basically it, really.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads us into James Clear and what he has to say about setting goals and building good habits. So I'll let you go for this one.
Yeah, I've not read his book personally yet. I think I will in the future, but I've heard him talk on a few podcasts and stuff, and I've heard him seen like a few YouTube videos talk about his book and stuff. And he was on Tim Ferriss. I'm not too sure when it was. It might have been quite a while ago now, but he had this quote. I think it's his like own original quote that he's maybe put in the book, or he just has that he says when he goes to talk about his book and stuff. And he says, every action that you take is a vote for the kind of person you want to be. And I think that kind of sums up beautifully the idea of like the habits and like how they can change who you are and the identity that you have. And we kind of referenced it earlier, how you can get 1% better each day, and then at the end of that year, you'd be 37 times better, because the accumulation, and I mean not the accumulation, like the compound interest of getting 1% better just leads to these astronomical benefits that people would actually realise if they did it. But James Clear is, I think he's just an author. I don't know if he has any other like things that he does in his life, but he's created this book that is all about systems and stuff like that, and it's more about, rather than being goal driven for success, you need to focus on the systems and the continuous improvement, and usually that will kind of end up with better results and faster results. So instead of thinking, oh, I want to buy this sports car, it's more so think about the system of that. Oh, I need to get better with my finances, and in turn you'll be more prudent and stuff, and then eventually you'll be able to buy that car and probably buy it faster. That's kind of like the overarching theme, I think, for his stuff. He has different chapters that kind of dive into different areas of habit building and like taking away bad habits and stuff. But another quote that I liked of his was, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. I remember you talking about systems and stuff in like previous podcasts and stuff, because have you read the book yourself, or?
Atomic Habits?
Yeah,
I have read it. So yeah, in terms of systems, so yeah, the idea of focusing on a system rather than focusing on the goal is you kind of attach your sense of achievement and fulfillment to whether you're executing the daily tasks which are required to achieve the bigger goal, as opposed to attaching it to the goal yourself. And the advantage of this is that you don't sacrifice your happiness on a daily basis, because when you have a desire and when you set a goal, kind of an agreement you make with yourself to some extent is you're not going to be happy until you achieve that goal. Whereas focusing more on the habits and the systems has the benefit of, as long as like you can be happy and fulfilled on a daily basis every time you execute the habits and do the tasks which are required to your goal. So you're attaching your sense of self-worth to that, and ultimately that leads to more consistency over time, because you're more motivated because you find the process more rewarding, as opposed to being attached to this faraway goal which you might not feel happy until you achieve.
I think it's very important. But I think we might have talked about it before, like in terms of what was it? Maybe like I think it was like sacrificing your 20s for the sake of becoming successful earlier on in life, being able to like maybe retire and have more free time. Like the end goals can seem so far away sometimes that it doesn't seem like there's any point in trying to even work towards it, because you might not even live long enough to realise it. Whereas like James Clear, like you just summed up then, is like says like it's not about the end goal, it's more about, like you're saying, being happy with that progress that you're making each day. And then if you do end up being lucky enough to live that long, you'll just have that goal come to you naturally, and you'll just be so happy when you get it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just reading over because I read it and I made some notes on it. So something I've written here which kind of goes with what you said is that success is not an event, it's a process, a reflection of good decisions over time. No single decision will cause success, but that decision can act as a step in the right or wrong direction that can have an effect on the trajectory of your future. So I think that kind of, once again comes back to pointing out that, so success is, if we break that down, success not being an event. So success is something achieved on that happens over years of so rather than it being an event, because a lot of people talk about like these overnight successes, when in reality they've worked 10 years to become the person who could perform on maybe that one night where they end up getting all the success. But it's the work they've put up until that place. And we see success as an event. Like you think about, okay, what have you achieved? And you might say, yeah, I achieved, like I won this trophy, or you make £1 million. Like you see the success as that event, whereas in reality, success is the process which leads to that event, and the event is just a byproduct of the core thing, which is the process. And then, so success is a reflection of your good decisions over time, and no single decision will make you successful. And that kind of points to the fact, what we're talking about, becoming 1% better every day. You'll be like, what was it, 37 times?
I think that's the number.
Over a year. So it points to the fact that, success is achieved in small periods over time rather than in one big period. And if we link this back to kind of goal setting and thinking about the life you want, obviously it's important to have a vision which ultimately allows you to set your goals and strategize to achieve them. But when you put the focus on the strategy and the daily tasks, it can be a more rewarding process and ultimately one that you're more consistent with.
It seems kind of weird to me though sometimes, like we all know the saying, like we're creatures of habit and stuff, and like I think most people could agree, like routine is kind of where the essence of life like lies for most people. I think like having the routine of going to work and working out on the same day, seeing the kids or like whatever, routine seems to work for most people in the world. But it's weird how, like, you could say that the routine is also similar to the systems that James Clear talks about. And then the end goal isn't necessarily what success is. It's more about the routine and the systems that you set in place to get to that point. It's kind of hard, I think, for humans to almost fall in love with the systems and routines, because, like, we're always so success orientated, and like the success is usually the end product. Like the success before, like, when we were like a different species, like Homo, whatever, like erectus or whatever, the success was producing offspring. People didn't necessarily fall in love with the process of trying to find a mate and mating with them and being fertile and then bringing up the offspring. Like, the success is the end point. And I think that's why it's kind of hard for people to, myself included, like, it's hard to almost fall in love with the routine and systems that you want to set in place.
Yeah. And perhaps we can't be unrealistic and so out of touch with, the way we're programmed that we completely, are detached from the goal when we're working towards it. But perhaps just, trying to make a mental shift to appreciate the process more and to, focus on the system as opposed to the goal is probably, a positive thing for people in the pursuit of their goals. And also, I think the big point of this is in the pursuit of any goal is going to be your habits over a long period of time, which determine your success.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked how, I'm hoping to read that book soon. But although the book kind of seems to talk about these things in a general sense, like, it does go into good detail, doesn't it, about how to actually set up these habits and stuff. Yeah,
it goes into a lot of detail about the ways of building habits, which, to be fair, we could do an entire episode on. But
I'll have to read the book first.
Yeah. To be fair, I can give it to you if you want.
Yeah. I've seen my teacher over at Barista, so maybe I'll take it and throw it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so that was kind of James Clear, and I feel like it's all kind of linking together. So if we just, maybe briefly look back at what we've gone over. So Jordan Peterson's philosophy, we spoke a lot about, setting a vision for the future and being able to strategize and integrate that. And the way you do that is through habits and systems, which is kind of what James Clear talks about. And, another thing Jordan Peterson talks about is taking responsibility for your situation, which is, a concept Jocko and David Goggins talk about a lot. And discipline is kind of an underlying thing, which allows you to, execute those habits on a daily basis in order to achieve your goals. And, suffering and pushing through suffering is going to be also going to be an important part of anything you want to achieve, which is worthwhile.
Yeah, it seems, obviously I've not read James Clear's book, but does he talk a lot about the importance of suffering and stuff? Like, the theme I got from the video was more so in terms of building a good habit. Isn't there 4 things to it? You want to make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. There doesn't seem to be any mention of the benefit of suffering, and in that video, did the book mention anything along those lines?
No, you're exactly right there, and that's actually a difference between kind of the philosophies, because James Clear's philosophy of things is almost as if you should do what you can to make it as easy for yourself as possible, whereas kind of Jocko and David Goggins' view of things is more based around
do the hard stuff.
And doing the hard stuff when you don't feel like it. Whereas, James Clear is very, so the 4 elements are to any habit is a cue. So the thing that causes you to think about the thing you want to do. A craving, which is a feeling of wanting to do it. An action, so the doing the thing and then the reward at the end. And to build good habits, you take those 4 things and you want to make them obvious. So you remember to do it, attractive, so that you want to do it, easy, so that you will do it, and satisfying, so that you feel rewarded when you do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of his habit building way in a nutshell. And I think James Clear kind of almost pushes back on the idea that discipline is, the best way of going about things, because there's evidence to suggest that your willpower is limited. Although I feel like, someone like David Goggins kind of proves that isn't true, and that, through the power of your mind, you are able to have infinite willpower almost.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult, but it can be done with the proper mindset. But yeah, his emphasis is on kind of making things easier for yourself. So, to looking at how these two things kind of collide and don't really match up. Like, do you think so? What do you think is more important? And do you think there's any way that those two ideas can actually coexist?
I think they do sort of coexist. Like when he was on Tim Ferriss, he talked. I don't know if it comes through in the book that much. He talks about, obviously you want to build these habits and set yourself up in the least what's the word? You want to set yourself up so the tasks you need to do have the least resistance to them. And all that kind of seems like he's trying to take the easy way out and stuff. He also mentioned in the podcast it's all about just showing up every time, making sure that you're just there and setting yourself up to improve the next time. Like you might not want to go to the gym for an hour or 2 hours, but if you just go for 5 minutes, that's better than nothing. And you're just setting yourself up to build that habit, and over time you can improve on it. Like you said, there's no point in trying to improve a habit that's not been established and is dominant in your life. You need to establish it first and then improve upon it. And then I guess that doesn't necessarily take willpower in such an extreme compared to making yourself run 100 miles without proper training, like David Goggins did or whatever. I think there is still a lot of willpower that needs to be had for someone just to set themselves up to make that habit. And then over time, they can maybe get to a point where you can run 100 miles without any training. So I think, although they seem very different, I think Jocko and David Goggins are just a extension of James Clear, and like almost like the veteran level of what Atomic Habits is all about. Whereas James Clear is more about, he's trying to attract the amateurs that have like no willpower compared to someone like Jocko and David Goggins. He's trying to attract them into this pathway of life, and then hopefully they can get to a point where they do have that willpower.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of discipline involved where it's just about showing up every time. So there's a bit of discipline where even if you don't want to, as long as you just show up, then that's the important thing. And yeah, perhaps that's, a good way how you've put it, how people like Jocko and David Goggins are just more advanced in terms of this, and they're able to take it further. But yeah, perhaps it all starts with habits. And, I would say I do resonate a lot more with the kind of David Goggins, Jocko attitude of things. But perhaps, the James Clear Atomic Habits way of looking at things is actually more sustainable and easier to build consistency over time, whereas having this big dump of motivation where you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this really difficult thing because discipline, and so perhaps maybe that's something I need to implement more, kind of the habits, making things easier for myself and focusing on incremental progress over time. Whereas, it's a lot more attractive to think like you're going to do this big discipline thing, and sometimes I'm able to do it, and I'm able to, have like a really good week of training where I go jiu-jitsu 6 times and go gym for a couple hours, like 3 times during a week. And, I get that through the mindset of like discipline. Like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to stick it through anyway.
Yeah,
But perhaps, I could build more consistency through taking an approach more based on incremental progress in terms of habits.
yeah, 100%. I think I saw a video ages ago, Goggins talking about how, I don't know if he has this problem still or whatever, but like he'll get his running gear ready the night before, and then all he has to do is wake up and get changed into it, and it's already ready there. He doesn't have to go into his wardrobe or anything. And
Yeah.
there was like one time, it might have been a one-off case, or maybe it's repeated every now and then, where he got ready, just tied his shoes, and he sat there, or maybe before he got ready, he just sat there looking at his shoes, or like not wanting to go outside and run for like 20 minutes, he said, and he was just there in his head like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, like, you need to do this, no, you shouldn't, I shouldn't. But I think because he set himself up with the systems in place where he reduced the resistance by putting his clothes out and gear ready, maybe that is what led him to actually going on the run in the end.
Yeah.
So we just don't know. So I think the systems in place are very important. Like Jocko, he wakes up every single fucking day at 4:30 around that time and works out straight away. In my mind, that's a system in place.
Yeah.
And although it takes huge will to do that, he's taking advantage of the systems that he can to make his life easier to do the harder things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. It takes discipline to do the things which make your life easier, which, feeds back into that positive feedback loop where you can start to make more progress. And yeah, I can definitely see now how people like Jocko and Goggins use systems in their life, even though they are attempting huge things.
Yeah, I think they just go beyond the systems at some point because they're just fucking 1 in a billion.
Yeah, maybe that's a key point. That's, these systems should kind of be the fundamental of building good habits, but there's also great value in going beyond the system and pushing yourself further through the suffering and difficulty. So the systems act as a baseline, but ultimately, that discipline and the ability to push through suffering is also extremely important.
Yeah, one thing I think, I've not really heard Jocko talk about it, not that he hasn't or doesn't believe in it, but I know James Clear talks about it, and like Goggins and Peterson and stuff, like envisioning the kind of identity that you want to have and like who you want to be gives you that kind of sense of motivation to push harder and go through the positive habits that are also difficult, and having that sense of like, I will be a better person if I do this challenging thing. I know Clear talks about it and Goggins and stuff. I don't know if Jocko has or not. He kind of, in terms of what I've heard from him, he's more about just doing being disciplined and just like doing the hard thing for the sake of the hard thing, not necessarily because you want to become that more. Not because you want to have that higher sense of achievement. Jocko kind of seems to just do it because it's the necessity.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a difference or not. I don't think it's an important difference because like the same result kind of comes from it, but that seems to be a difference that I've noticed between Jocko and the others.
Yeah, I feel like
the idea of identity and stuff. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like that attitude of Jocko's. I've heard people say that it's a very kind of Navy SEAL attitude where you just take advantage of whatever opportunity is in front of you, and you just, like, you're in an environment and you just see the opportunities to, execute tasks and to move forwards. Like, it's like a very systematic way of doing things. But yeah, I think like James, like the rest of them, definitely value identity a lot. And something James Clear says is that, the easiest way to maintain habits is through your identity. So if you believe, oh, I'm the type of person that goes to the gym, then you're always going to go to the gym no matter what, if you truly believe that, and it won't be difficult for you. But but it's difficult to just make yourself believe you are something which you might not currently be. And the way you build up that belief over time is through having the habits that that turn you into that sort of person. And then focusing on the systems rather than the goals. Because if you focus on the goal, you'll think, I haven't achieved the goal yet, so I'm not that person. Whereas if you focus on the systems, you're like, I'm executing the tasks every day. I am this person. So yeah, I think identity is very important. And like in terms of what Jordan Peterson talks about with Envision and your ideal self, and what David Goggins does, where he thinks about the type of person he wants to be. Like, these are very powerful things to help you make the right decisions and push through difficulty, because it's part of your identity. And perhaps that's another big important part of self-improvement is sculpting your identity. And perhaps there are some ways you can do that through like mental manipulation, like trying to visualize the type of person you want to be, or through doing affirmations and shit. But ultimately it's probably going to be through your habits. And rather than I think it's a quote from Alex Hormozi that Chris Williamson always says, but it's something like, rather you gain self-belief not through shouting affirmations at a mirror, but through having an undeniable stack of evidence that you are the person who you say you are. So yeah, that's about executing the tasks, and over time you will build the identity.
Yeah, 100%. I think it is very important to have the identity as well. But like we were saying earlier, like you fall back onto the systems in place, because humans kind of, we have this friction that we come across in life, and when we get that kind of mental state of like discomfort, we just fall back into place of what our habits are. So it's, I don't know, would you say it's more important to have habits than identity, or? Overall? I'd
say it's more important to have identity, but ultimately if you have the identity, then that is the most powerful thing. But you can't just manufacture the identity. The only way of creating it is through habits. So yeah, they kind of go together.
Yeah, that's very good.
And I mentioned Hormozi there, and obviously talking about habits. So in terms of self-improvement, in the self-improvement space online, you'll see kind of a lot of people talking about different habits you should do. And we could go through the benefits of each, like meditation, journaling, reading, these kind of like 4. Yeah. Sorry?
Ice baths and cold and exposure.
Yeah. Doing these physical things. Could be like some stuff that like Andrew Huberman says, like getting sunlight every morning. This is going to make you feel better and function better. So, that's a part of self-improvement. And obviously these tasks, potentially we could do a whole episode talking about those things, the best habits to have and the benefits of different habits that you can have in your daily routine. Because we could talk forever about this, and this episode's already like 2 hours long. So, but the point I was getting at was, so you have these set of habits, whereas Alex Hormozi kind of talks about how your habits, you can have all these things in your routine, but ultimately the most important thing is just doing the work you've set out to do. So for him, obviously he's very business oriented. It's if your main goal is to grow your business, then the way you should conduct your day is you wake up and you get to work as efficiently as possible. And ultimately that's the thing that's going to offer you the most fulfillment and happiness, is by building the thing that you care about the most. Whereas, he spoke about once, I think he was speaking to, coaching someone, and he was talking about it. He was talking to this person, they were saying, like, they've got this life coach or something that has them, waking up in the morning and doing, going for a walk, and then doing an ice bath, and then doing sauna, and then meditating, and then doing gratitude journaling. And by the time he starts work, it's already like 11 a.m. and he's wasted like hasn't wasted, but he's, the first 4 hours of the day is gone. or maybe it doesn't take that long, but just for the sake of argument, and he hasn't been working on the thing which is most important to him. So, obviously the habits can be beneficial, but how do you think, what's most important? Is it having these habits, or just on doing the thing which is most important to you?
I think it's hard to know what's more important for most people, but like this person I know, my cousin, like he's very driven and stuff, and like he hits the targets he needs to hit each day. Like he does like these certain exercises in the gym that are like good for his hips and like his ankle mobility and stuff, and then like mobility orientated. But then he also on top of that will do cardio training or like body weight training and stuff. Then I'll have work to go to as well, or like actual football training to go to. And like he's not regimented in terms of going to the gym every single morning and stuff, because he might have work in the morning, but he makes sure he just gets the work done he needs to each day and hits those targets and checks them off the list. And that works really well for him because he's just very driven. But I think there's other people that I think maybe the difference might be like the idea of what your life goal is or purpose is. Like he knows what his is and he takes the steps to get to them, and it doesn't matter what order he takes those steps in each day, he just makes sure he takes them. Whereas other people, I think myself included, I don't really know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, or what I want to do for the rest of my life. So having the habit of waking up and getting some sunlight and then going to the gym, coming back, eating, doing some work, then going training in the evening, that works better for me most of the time. So I think maybe the difference could be the idea of what someone's purpose is. And if they have a true purpose, that might be a difference, but I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your ideas?
Perhaps it links back to what we were talking about in terms of identity versus habits. So if you're at the stage where you're building the habits and you don't necessarily have the identity yet, it's going to be way easier to maintain those habits when you have a strict routine. And I think routine can be very powerful for just doing the things you need to do every day and being able to focus on the system. Whereas if your routine is all over the place, then, it can be difficult to just it's more difficult to do the daily things that you need to do. And in that case, having a routine and doing certain habits which are going to benefit like your mind and your body is ultimately going to help your work. So there's definitely benefit there. But on the other side of things, I think if you do have the proper identity, then you rely less on the routine. And, something Alex Hormozi talks about as well is, you can become fragile if you're too attached to a routine, because, things are going to come up in your life where your routine is interrupted. And if you're relying on that to do the things you need to do, then, you're kind of screwed, and it's going to, cause a certain level of neuroticism where you feel like where you're neurotically attached to a routine and you feel like, oh, I woke up an hour late, oh, my day's ruined. Like you might have those kind of thoughts where for someone like Alex Hormozi, if he for whatever reason stays up a bit later than usual and then wakes up a bit later than usual, he's just going to do what is required to achieve his goals anyway. So that there are benefits there, and perhaps it links to that there are benefits to being less attached to a routine, but perhaps in order for that to happen, you need to kind of build the identity which comes through habits and routine. But there is definitely a tension there about about routine being beneficial for your productivity, but you don't want to be neurotically attached to it, or it can actually negatively affect your productivity.
Yeah, it's important, yes. The structure can help you maintain those habits, but the structure can kind of almost limit you and put you in chains almost. Yeah,
and it maybe the issue is it can impede your adaptability. So you rely on it too much, and especially if you're like a business owner or something and you're in a dynamic environment, then it's potentially important to, be able to ride those waves, so to speak.
Yeah. You don't want to lose that responsiveness to new things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, do you think maybe the focus should be on just hitting the targets then? And then if that happens to be in the routine, that averages out as the same thing over time, that's fine. But if the main focus is on the targets, they'll always get hit.
Yeah, I feel like potentially the issue, though, is I find this with myself. Like, I'm someone who really likes a routine, and I find myself to be way more productive when I'm in a routine. And if I have tasks to do, but my routine's messed up, then I just won't end up doing them a lot of the time. And I'm not sure whether that's, maybe I haven't built the identity as a type of person who will just do what's required no matter what. And, there are certain things, like I'd say more so with something like going to the gym or going to jiu-jitsu, like with those things, regardless of if my routine gets fucked up, I'll usually be pretty consistent with them. Whereas a lot of times with uni work, if my routine's messed up, then I might I'll have work to do, but I just won't do it when I planned I would or said I should.
Yeah.
So I sometimes fall a bit behind. Yeah, and yeah, I feel like routine is more important for me for doing work. I personally find that more difficult to stick to. But yeah, I think routine. Yeah, I personally think it's very important. And you asked there, what's more important, just doing the tasks or just doing the routine? Ultimately, it's going to be the tasks that matter, but perhaps it comes back to the same comparison we made between what's more important in terms of James Clear's philosophy of making things easy for yourself and setting up systems, as opposed to someone like David Goggins, who takes things so much further than any system could set up for him. But basically, the systems set you up for success, and perhaps having a good routine sets you up for success. But at a more advanced level, is good to, perhaps it's good. And I've heard people say this actually. It's good to go through a phase where you're very focused on routine and having really good habits, and it's kind of this general self-improvement. Whereas, once you've made some progress in that, and you've got a focus and a purpose, and you're the type of person who has done these good habits for years, like at that point it's good just to make sure you're getting the work done and just become the type of person who just does the work no matter what, and is less attached to the routine, so it's more specific to what's important to you and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I hear that.
Anything else you want to say for this episode? I feel like that's probably a good place to end it.
I think we've covered pretty much everything I was thinking of. I think that's sort of it.
Yeah.
I think maybe, like you said, mentioned earlier, the self-authoring program, that could be a nice starting point for people. If they don't really know where to start, I think Jordan Peterson's framed it in a very good way. That does ultimately benefit anyone that actually does complete the self-authoring program. I think I signed up for it, but I've not actually started it yet. But I've got a break over Easter now, so I need to start it rather than putting it off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. It's a good place to start. And even if you don't get the self-authoring program, just take some time and maybe write down or even just think about, what goals are important to you, the type of life you want, the type of life you don't want, and, come up with some goals and, strategize towards them and try and implement that into your daily routine, into a system.
Yeah.
So yeah, and stay hard and try and conquer your inner bitch. I think that pretty much summarizes what we've said in the episode.
Yes, indeed. Kill the inner bitch. Right then, I guess that's everything then. Thank you guys for listening. Much appreciated. Check us out on Spotify, YouTube, and subscribe and like if you'd like to. I hope you do. We'll see you next time, I guess. Bye.
See ya.